I'm going to try something new today. So, of course, this is one of my rare outdoor shoots. I'm still playing around with the gimbal, try to make it less shaky as possible. So bear with me for a bit. And the other thing that's going to be different today is this is going to be an unstructured video, really more like a stream of thought as opposed to a structured presentation with data and calculations and predictions and all that sort of stuff. I just need to be careful not to run into one of the cyclists zooming through on the canal path. So I am in the Regent's Canal. As you can see, it's actually one of my favorite parts in London in that not that many tourists know about it. And so cute dogs, as you can hear behind in the background, and lots of really beautiful houses. I'll show you some of the flats, despite being in the UK for 7 years. So those are flats, not houses. I think in America you call it condominium versus apartments. These are different stuff. But in America, again, you have a different way of organizing your lease structure. So in the UK, if you don't own the freehold of the property, it's called flat. It doesn't matter that it has land around it, but if you own the freehold, that's called houses. There's one key main difference of buying properties in the UK. Actually, I might as well talk about how UK property is different from a lot of other countries, especially those countries that I've lived in. And those of you who know me knows that I've lived in 5 different countries, 4 of which are related, meaning UK plus 3 other Commonwealth countries. So the rules are quite similar. And then I lived in China before, and obviously the rule is very different from the UK. And property ownership was a question mark in China because you didn't have that. Ooh, really have to be careful with this guy not to drop my mobile phone into the water. So yes, but even then, the way UK property law works is still very different from all the rest of the countries that I've known. And the mentality British people have with property is very different as well. I think there's this really strong distinction between leasehold versus freehold. I think in Australia, the distinction is pretty strong too. And in Singapore, I think a lot of people just take it for granted that it's near impossible to buy a freehold property. So people just accept that when you buy a property, chances are it's leasehold. I think the other complexity about properties in the UK is, I mentioned this in one of my videos that's coming up, hopefully next week. I'm still doing the editing work. It's just how varied the properties are in the UK. So we are in the canal right now, and in a lot of countries, especially the younger ones like Singapore and Malaysia, you just think that there's freehold versus leasehold. But in the UK, you also have things like factory conversion. So this were all warehouses in the past, and then they get converted into flats. And you can see this is actually really beautiful, and there is a historical reason to it because this canal, I think, was built about 200 years ago. It was dug up for transport reason, and this was before the invention of container, like big 40-foot container that revolutionizes global trade. So in the past, goods get traveled around the world. I mean, things like sugar, timber, spices, and all that. They get transported around the world, and then they get transported into smaller boats, and they go on this canal, and then they can go up to places like Oxford. So this canal actually goes all the way up to Reading. You can still walk on this canal, and it goes all the way up to Reading. And so if you think about it from a town planning and practicality point of view, it just makes a lot of sense to have warehouses along the river. So they are used to store grains and anything really. With the invention of container, you don't really need these places to be warehouses anymore. So they actually went through a period of degeneration where they were not being used as warehouse. They were built as warehouse, and somebody have to just buy them up and reconfigure the internal of these buildings. The other thing about this building, their insulation is horrible because they're warehouses. They don't need to have insulation. So when some of the developers first bought them up, they have to, first of all, insulate these buildings and making sure that it's suitable for human habitation. But they're beautiful. I mean, I personally love it because it's just so full of character, and there aren't that many places in the world where you can find warehouse conversion like this. I think you might have some in New York, in places like Brooklyn, but they're not on the river. They're like by the sea. You can probably still find them in places like Rotterdam and Amsterdam, basically historical ports, where they have this sort of transition from older style ship to a container ship. I'm probably going to have a lot of misinformation in this YouTube because this is really a stream of thought video. The other type of property is a houseboat. And the canal is full of houseboat, which is another reason why it's quite fun walking along the canal. So houseboat, obviously, technically speaking, not a property, but you could get mortgages on houseboat. And a lot of people do live on houseboats, and it's considered quite cool in some parts of the London, depending on where you manage to get a mooring for your houseboat. And some of this houseboat can be as cheap as £50,000, depending on the condition and the size of the houseboat. Some of them can go up to about £150,000 for the newer one. And if they have mooring rights in some of the more centralized location in London, they can even go up to £500,000 for a small medium-sized houseboat. The advantage of houseboat location, because it's near impossible to get a 2-bedroom house in this sort of location in London for that kind of price. So some people would prefer to live on houseboat while they save up to get a like proper property. But of course, houseboat comes with its own challenges in that it does cost quite a bit of money to maintain, because you do have to clean the bottom part of the houseboat. And during winter, insulation can be a problem. It does get very cold, especially when you have wind blowing around on the canal. But it is an option. Some people enjoy living in houseboat. It can be quite a cool lifestyle choice. So different types of properties in the UK. I think the other discussion that people always have is freehold versus leasehold. I think British people seem to be quite obsessed with freehold versus leasehold. Again, I think maybe because I like to look at things not in black and white, but in grayscale. It's again not that straightforward. So, like I mentioned just now, freehold meaning you own the land that the building sits on, and leasehold means somebody else own the land and you own, technically speaking, anything that's within the walls of the structure that you just bought. And I think a lot of people are quite concerned about leasehold because you heard horror stories of service charges increase massively. And I have seen freeholder or the management company increase service charge by 50% when they do an upward revision. And this happened during the Russian-Ukraine war when the petrol prices went up quite a bit, and hence the energy prices went up a lot. And I think that put some people into like strictly no leasehold sort of criteria. Again, in the UK, you kind of have to be careful. Some people are quite black and white about it, right? They say, oh, I don't want to buy a leasehold. But if your budget is about £300,000 and you want to buy something in London, for example, it's near impossible for you to buy a freehold property. So leasehold is your only option. So, unless you want to buy outside of London with a £300,000 budget, then that might be possible. But some people just don't want to commute. I mean, I personally hate commuting, right? So what do? Well, you look at who is the freeholder when you buy a leasehold flat. I personally live in a leasehold flat, and my freeholder is the local council. So I have comfort in knowing that the council is not going to raise my service charge in an unreasonable way, because politically they kind of have to make the leaseholder happy. But if you live in one of these houses, one of these flats behind me, there is a very high chance that the leaseholder will increase your service charge whenever they can, because they are a for-profit company and they can show you their accounts and all that, but it's just really difficult to understand whatever you pay for or whatever they pay for, is it value for money. And I have friends who are so unhappy with their freehold, with their management company, that they decided to buy over the freehold of the block of apartment that they sit on. It was a long drawn out legal process. They managed to do that, and they managed to bring the service charge down by quite a lot, but it was not without a fight. If you love this sort of like apartments, for example, as they call it in some other parts of the world, if you love this kind of flat, it is bound to be a leasehold. You can't buy this. I mean, you could buy this as a share of freehold in some circumstances, but share of freehold also have its own challenges. Share of freehold also means you take on the liabilities of the building. If the roof collapses, for example, you have to figure that out, how to fix it, and you have to come up with the money on how to fix it. So yeah, I mean, buying properties in the UK is challenging, but then again, sometimes you get really charming properties like this, and that kind of makes you go, maybe it's worthwhile. Maybe it's worthwhile to go through all that trouble. It is pretty much a personal choice. Oh, something else that I was gonna say, since we're in the Beauvior area, this is one of my favorite areas in London. And when I first got here, I did dream about buying a flat here because I just love having that river view. And so I've always been tracking property prices around this area, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised to find out that the property prices has dropped quite a lot in this area. So I was looking at a one bedroom, just before I came out, I was looking at a one bedroom on Rightmove just behind me. And when I first came to the UK, that one bedroom would be going for about £450,000, and it's listed for £350,000 now. So it's a 30% drop, which is pretty amazing and a little bit concerning, because you go, the economy must be so bad that somebody would drop it by 30% just to move the property, right? And then there are a couple of two bedrooms for sale in the block of apartment that I quite like in the past before I bought my current one. It used to go for about £800,000, and now it's going for about £700,000. So again, we're talking about a 10% drop minimum, more than 10% drop. So, but would I buy it now? If I'm in the market, if I have cash? I don't know. I mean, there's quite a lot of uncertainty in the economy. Again, goes back to buying versus renting, the video that I did. I think if your time horizon is more than 5 years, then it's okay. But you always have to be careful that, what if you might need to exit the property in less than 5 years? Are you going to make a loss? And also, are you okay to take the loss? Some people just like financially cannot accept a loss because it will put them in a pretty dire situation. So think about situations like this, and before you make a long-term commitment about whether you want to buy a property. And I have one-on-one coaching sessions to help people through that sort of decision. So link is in my bio. You can always just fill in a Google form, and I'll be happy to have a quick chat with you and see whether we can work together in helping you get on this property buying journey, or just continue renting, which is not a bad thing sometimes. The other thing I heard the other day, I was a bit shocked, and I think this probably doesn't gel very well with my Singaporean mind. I was chatting with a friend, and she said, the way British people make property decisions is very different from us. We're Singaporeans. I guess sometimes we're just a little bit too logical for our own good. But a lot of people here, they buy houses just based on emotions. Like, I'm like, okay, that sounds scary. And I think a British person would probably say that I'm so unemotional and unromantic, and maybe I am. Maybe that's why I'm single. But you can't buy a house just based on emotions. I mean, unless you're a billionaire and you have endless amount of money to burn. If you're taking a mortgage, if you're stretching your finances, please give it a bit of thought before you commit to buying a house or property on emotions, because that is scary. Because if you take on a mortgage, it's an easily 30-40 year commitment in mortgage. And what if your life circumstances change? What if you have kids, get married, divorce, decided that you want to do something else in Thailand or Spain? You need to budget in that sort of flexibilities in your life, especially in a fast-changing world. So that's my rant today. Not even sure where this is going, but I'm trying something new, so I'm gonna give it a try. And if you want to make an appointment with me to talk about property, link is in the bio. Or you are seriously thinking about buying a property and you need a bit of help because nobody in the market is acting on behalf of buyers. Everybody is acting on behalf of seller. If you're in the market to buy a property and you could do it with a property coach, link is in the bio, and I look forward to working with you. Bye.